The placing of Our Blessed Lady at the beginning of the year is inspiration given to Paul VI. It had been the circumcision, and given that in our culture we do not practice that, it had been thought that it wasn't the best title for such an important moment. And so by placing this under the Divine Motherhood of Our Blessed Lady, it gives an impetus to devotion to her, and also in some way places the year under her mantle. It is therefore a moment when, if possible, we should have time with heaven in church and also in our heart, because she is the model of those who treasure things in the heart, people of interiority, people who are not always running around from the beginning of the year to the end. This then is a quiet pause before we begin the year, and we are asking for a blessing. Indeed, we are given an ancient formula for blessing in the first reading. It has been used ever since. It is used even now in Christian worship. It is used because it is scriptural by our Protestant brethren. It is used by ourselves. It's one of the formulae that one can use in a prolonged blessing at the end of a liturgical act. And it says it all in Hebrew terms, which we could now unpack. As always, the Hebrew is very dense. It says it all in a few muscular words. So what have we? The actual formula is given, and this is how they are to bless the sons of Israel. May the Lord bless you. This word blessing is in itself a concept to be understood properly. In the Hebrew mind, already the act of blessing God, the giver, while holding an object, sets the object apart. That is something that we have recuperated, retrieved in the liturgical reform of the Second Vatican Council. We have had now a fairly simple way of setting apart bread and wine only for the honour of God, and we notice that that is the form of the prayer now used. Blessed are you, God, that is. And then this also has the effect of setting apart for a blessing what is then not just ordinary bread and wine. And then later on, the epiclesis invokes the power of the Spirit. And notice that this word invoke, epiclein, is something that is coming here, because actually at the end of this formula of benediction we have the Lord instructing that this is how they are to call my name upon the sons of Israel. There's a double use of a form of the word name coming here. Naming my name upon. So we have this element here of blessing, which the Lord also used, because the Hebrews did indeed have the strong sense of blessing also in the form of placing hands upon and invoking God's grace on a human being. For the Lord also is seen to use this direct active blessing upon elements. In the Greek that is trying to translate the Hebrew notion, we have two roots coming in. One is eulogein, which gives us the word eulogy. Eu means well, and logein, the root of speaking, to say well, which in the Latin comes through as benedicere, well, bene, dicere, say, which gives us our word benediction, to bless. And the other we have is Eucharistein. And Eu is the same word again, well, and the root of charis is the root of grace and favour, which we will find again in this blessing given to Moses. And give you his grace, charis, what was said to the Blessed Virgin precisely. You are blessed, or blessed one, hail blessed one, the past participle of to grace, literally. Ke charitomeni, you are the graced one. But grace here is translating the Hebrew word chan, which also is in this benediction. May the Lord grace you. May he give you his grace. May he be gracious unto you. But anyway, the Lord in the upper room uses this strong sense of blessing here, an object. He blessed them. He blessed the chalice. He blessed the bread. And the two roots come in the two traditions of the transmission of what happened in the upper room. We have the Eucharistia root coming in, which gives us our word Eucharist, and we have the other root also coming through, Eulogein. And the actual act of blessing, benedicere, comes into that. He blessed. And the Eucharistein one expresses the other notion of giving thanks to God for, and in so doing the object is also blessed. But anyway, here we have an empowering of the Aaronic priesthood to bless the people, and the Lord is going to honor that blessing. So if that is the case in the ancient line of Aaronic priesthood, how much more is it in the case of the high priestly role of Christ himself, the Logos par excellence, who hands his power over to the church that he founds. We find that St. Luke reports that he raised his hand upon them, his hands, raising up his hands upon them, he blessed them. And that root there is coming in again. He blessed them. And that's the moment of the ascension. It's possible that that was the first time in history when the sign of the cross was first made. We're not quite sure. But certainly this element of blessing people directly is coming through, and that comes through the Christian priesthood. And Our Lady is reported to have said that she cannot bless as the priest blesses. And therefore it is an indication to be aware of the power of the priestly blessing. It is not just a sign. And in parenthesis, it is important that that also be understood for what it is. For a layperson can only pray for a blessing. He cannot confer a blessing. And to give the impression that he can is to mislead people. For instance, when it comes to Eucharistic celebrations, only the priest can actually bless children. And it should be understood that children have the right to be blessed and not just have an invocation of a layperson. And in any case, the very touch of consecrated hands are different because they are the hands of Christ himself, the high priest blessing, through the hands of the consecrated priest, because those hands have been anointed and empowered, and they can heal, and they can certainly have an effect on a child who, innocent and open, is very open also to the grace of God and not contaminated. So it's important that the child before Holy Communion have that blessing and not something of a category B. So all that to say that we're handling here what is already embryonic, and the Lord is going to honor what is done in his name according to the formula which he is here conferring. So we have this element of asking that the Lord be merciful unto. This, which I mentioned, is the root of grace, which we find in names like John and Anna, and it is the favour of the Lord coming through. May God be favourable, may God be gracious unto you. May God grace you, literally it would be in the Hebrew. And this interesting, very Semitic expression of lift up his face upon you. the light of his face and shine upon you. This element of the beaming gaze of the Lord. It's very beautiful, actually. We're asking the Lord, lift up his countenance upon you and shine, as it were, with a beam of smiling love upon you, and give you his peace. So, literally, may the Lord lift his face. In Hebrew it's always in the plural, his faces. It's kind of plural of majesty, and or his gazes, whatever, but it's always a concrete expression in Hebrew, the face, upon you, and give you his peace. Shalom is more than just an absence of war. It's a wholesomeness, and we need that wholesomeness of body and soul, mind, conscience and spirit in harmony with its maker to have peace. One sometimes has people coming to one asking for a blessing, but one is tempted to say one can't fix a bit of a person. One starts, if possible, with a thorough confession, so the inside is first of all at peace. In some Catholic cultures, people are very keen on getting these blessings. Well, you can't cosmeticize grace. It has to be something which is also demanding and having an effect, because grace can't get into the will which is shut, and the will might be trying to have a shortcut to the favours of heaven without actually surrendering itself. It doesn't work. Until the Lord is honoured as Lord, then he cannot freely bless. Therefore, the first thing to do is to get the soul washed and genuinely in harmony on the level of the will with the will of its maker, and then there is freedom for the Lord to bless. The Lord has his hands in some measure tied when he finds that there is grave, unhandled stuff inside, and can't do much until that is actually sorted. And the shalom, therefore, that we are offered is precisely getting into the project of God, which is for our good. For outside that project, there can only be human unpeace, and we're pretty good at inventing its varied forms. So at the beginning of the year, it would be well to think about that already. Is there stuff taking away the deep peace in my heart before I face this new year? Because facing a year with sin on the conscience, stuff not actually faced up to, owned up to, is an invitation to mess up the year. We can't have a shortcut to the divine grace and favour. And so, when it comes to embarking on a period of life, we can turn to the second reading, which precisely talks about the time which is coming to its fullness. The Greek here is in verse 4 of chapter 4 of the Galatians, when the pleroma, the fullness, to chronu, of time had come. And then it goes on to say that God sent his Son. So this is the fullness of which the Old Testament, and therefore these blessings are but the foreshadowing. We have a fullness in Christmas and in this octave. Already 8 days, there's a kind of completion there. We remember that if one looks at the ancient baptismal structures there, for instance in the Vatican or in the old places in Italy where there's next to the cathedral there's also a baptistry, they're all octagonal, the 8th day. Well, there's a fullness there. It's as though it's the first day of eternity, one beyond the week. And here we have this fullness of time coming through, as it were, we're at the beginning of the openness of heaven to what it wanted to give and couldn't give in all those centuries leading to Christ. There were many holy people in the Old Testament, but none could get to beatific vision. Until that word was heard, it is accomplished. Therefore, there is a fullness of time coming here, the awaiting centuries. Indeed, St. Bernard has a very beautiful meditation on the way in which the angel was waiting along with the whole of creation for one syllable from the Blessed Virgin, waiting anxiously on bended knee. All were waiting because she had to give consent on our behalf that the body, the humanity, could be given to the Son. It had to come through her, and we were waiting in her for it to come. And she said, "Fiat." But that same fiat is what the Lord is asking for before he can bless. He can't command, and we alone have the key to the will. Only the human being can say yes to grace. And therefore God will not force anyone as a robot into glory. That, by the way, is the answer to those who criticize God for allowing some to be lost. We ourselves allow ourselves to be lost against the divine project and loving will. So, at the beginning of this year, it is well to pause on that expression, ubi venit plenitudo temporis, when the fullness of time had come, because a new year is also the close of an old year. It happens at midnight, and many celebrations happen at midnight over the planet. Indeed, strangely enough, the world has not succeeded in completely erasing Christianity from the calendar, because over the world it is actually the birth of Christ, which is AD BC, even though they avoid those terms nowadays, but the time is calculated from the Incarnation. With regard to the Gospel, the name again comes here, and from this time on it becomes less habitual to use the name Yeshuach for anyone other than the Son of God. It had been a common name until then. We have it in the form of Joshua. But here we have again the importance of giving a right name. And it is something that a Christian family should also bear in mind before baptizing a child, that the name is going to be there for all time, once given. And it's not fair to give just some famous name of the period, a footballer or a pop star or an actor, to a child. It is better to give a heavenly model, an icon, a saint who can help. Traditionally, it used often to happen in the context of the saint of the day on the calendar. That can happen. But certainly the child is linked to the person, the Christian soul, the saint in heaven of whom it bears the name. They say, for instance, that children who bear the name of Joseph are particularly favoured because they have a very powerful protector. The same would be true of a Blessed Lady, surely. And so we can always add at least Mary or Joseph to whatever else is happening. It gives them that extra link with the summit, as it were. So, names. The name the angel had given before his conception. And it was when, eventually, in the case of his cousin, that Zechariah did say, yes, his name is John, and so on, that he was able then to open his mouth once again and to praise God. His name is John, again the name which means grace, favour. So at the beginning of this year, let us bear in mind, we are favoured, we are graced, we are empowered, but we have to do our bit, otherwise omnipotence itself is limited by our refusal. We have power over God on the level of the will, insofar as we can deflect grace and indeed bliss, even for all eternity.